In a world that moves too fast to remember, there are places the modern map avoids. Places where the mist clings to the hills like skin, and the soil never forgets what's buried in it. Where the wind carries secrets, and silence hums with something old, something watching. Welcome to Folklore, where the stories aren't made up, they're remembered. Here, we explore the forgotten rites, the cursed bloodlines, and the sacred pacts that once kept the balance between man and the unknown. Tonight, we bring you a tale whispered in the breath of dying crops and broken traditions. It comes from a village swallowed by mountains and fog, where autumn doesn't just mean falling leaves, it means sacrifice. They call him the Harvest Father, a figure carved from bark, crowned with crow feathers, older than God and hungrier than time. Each year, a man is chosen to wear the mask, to enter the silo, to give the land what it's owed. But what happens when a man refuses to give up what he loves? What happens when grief becomes heavier than obedience? When the offering is left undone, the fields rot, the livestock twist in their skin, and the dead come closer. This is not just a story. It's a warning. The Harvest Father waits beneath the soil, and he is still digging. The mist came early that year. It slid down the mountains like a shroud, pale and wet, wrapping the valley in silence. The villagers said it was a sign of favor, the Harvest Father's breath descending to bless the soil. But this mist did not feel like a blessing. It clung to doors, it whispered at windows, and in it you couldn't always tell if what you saw was truly there. The village of Root Hollow was the kind of place forgotten by time and untouched by progress. There were no paved roads, only dirt paths that curved like veins through the fields. The houses were wood and stone, stained by rain and shaped by hand. People here spoke softly, prayed often, and followed the old ways, not because they believed, but because they were afraid not to. At the edge of the village, where the wheat began and the shadows thickened, stood the granary, a tall wooden silo with no locks, no signs, and one rule: enter only when chosen. Every autumn, as the leaves burned gold and the air turned sharp, the village gathered in the chapel for the lottery. Not everyone attended out of devotion. Some came out of duty, others from dread. The rite was older than any of them, older than the chapel, older than the mountain itself, they said. And every year it required a man, one man, to wear the mask, to bless the fields, to enter the silo at dusk, and return at dawn emptied, silent, but alive. They never spoke of what happened inside, perhaps because no one remembered. That was part of the magic, the elders claimed. Forgetfulness was a sign the rite had been accepted. The land would give back in return, crops bursting from the soil, livestock born fat and strong, pantries full through the cold months. No one ever went hungry in Root Hollow, but no one ever refused the calling either. Until now. Elias stood in the chapel's back row, his shoulders hunched beneath his faded coat, his eyes hollow from too many sleepless nights. He looked older than his 39 years, the kind of tired that lived in the bones, not the skin, the kind grief carved slowly like water on stone. His wife Lyra had been gone 6 months. Some said it was fever, Others whispered it was the sorrow that took her. She'd lost their child the winter before, and after that she moved through the world like someone half-remembered, smiling with her mouth but not her eyes, sleeping in bursts, praying when she thought Elias wasn't listening. And then one morning, she simply didn't wake. Elias had buried her beneath the hawthorn tree behind their home, where the wildflowers grew between roots, and the wind carried her favorite song through the leaves. He never spoke of her death. He never cried, at least not where others could see. But every night he lit a single candle in the window and waited for the breeze to blow it out. He never told them what he whispered before he slept. He never told them what he still saw in his dreams. The chapel smelled of wax, wood, and something older, something damp and sweet, like fruit just beginning to rot. The villagers filled the pews in silence, their breath fogging in the cold. At the front, the 3 elders stood in a line, their ceremonial cloaks dark with age and stitched with crow feathers. Elder Marin, the tallest, lifted the black box from the altar and placed it on the pulpit. She did not speak. She didn't need to. Everyone knew the ritual. One by one, the men of Root Hollow rose, walked forward, and drew a token from the box. Most fingers emerged clenched around blank wood. One would not. The token was carved with a spiral, deep, smooth, unmistakable. When Elias's turn came, the room held its breath. He walked slowly, as if each step took effort. His hands trembled slightly as he reached inside. For a moment, his eyes closed, and when they opened again, he was holding the spiral. There was no applause, no cheers, just silence, as if the whole village exhaled at once. Relief for the others, resignation for him. Elias said nothing. He returned to his seat, token still in hand. The spiral pulsed in his palm like something alive. After the ceremony, the villagers drifted out in pairs and clusters, whispering under their breath. Elias remained seated long after the last candle burned low, staring at the box, at the altar, at nothing. The elders approached him quietly. "You'll be prepared at sundown. You know what's expected." Elias didn't answer. He only nodded. He did know. But this time, he would not do it. Not all of it. That afternoon, the air grew colder. The mist thickened, rising like smoke from the soil. The village became a painting of blurred outlines and muted shapes. Children were kept indoors. Animals refused to feed. Somewhere in the distance, a dog howled once and then fell silent. Elias returned to his home, lit Lyra's candle, and sat by the window. The mask would arrive at dusk, brought by the elders as tradition demanded. It would be carved from bark, soaked in ash, and crowned with feathers from the crows that circled the silo each year like sentries. He had worn it once before, a decade ago. He didn't remember much, only the weight of it, the warmth that bloomed in his chest, and a kind of darkness that felt both outside and within. When he woke, the silo was empty, and the earth had already begun to bloom. But this time the offering would demand more than he could give. This time they would want her, Lyra, her memory, her scent on the pillow, the shape of her smile when she hummed while hanging the laundry, the way she whispered his name in sleep, the last trace of her voice in the house. And he wouldn't. They could take the mask, the rite, the night in the silo, but they would not take what little remained of her. He would go through the motions, but the sacrifice would be a lie. At dusk, the knock came. 3 slow knocks, 1 pause, then 1 final knock. The elder stood on his doorstep, shrouded in their robes, the mask cradled in Marin's hands like a crown. They said nothing as they handed it to him, only bowed their heads and turned to leave. Elias stared at the box for a long time. It smelled of cedar and something faintly metallic, blood perhaps, or rust. The feathers were glossy black, the eyes hollow. It looked more like a face than a carving. He placed it on the table. Then he walked to the window, where Lyra's candle still flickered in the dark. He whispered again, as he had for the past 6 months, "I'm not letting go." Behind him, the mask waited, and outside in the fields, the crows began to gather. The mask watched him. It sat on the table as if it had always been there, as if it had grown from the wood crane, not been delivered by human hands. Its eyes were hollow, but not empty. Its mouth was a line carved too straight, too deep, as though it had once screamed and never closed again. The feathers crowning its head shimmered with an unnatural black, glinting even in the candlelight. They didn't move in the breeze. They didn't twitch when Elias passed. They simply waited, still and certain, like blades in the dark. He didn't touch it, not yet. Outside, the mist had thickened to a wall. The village was gone, swallowed in white. Only the faint creak of old wood and the distant caw of crows reminded him that the world still existed beyond his walls. Elias stood at the basin and poured water into a cracked ceramic bowl. He washed his hands, his arms, his face, slow, deliberate, as the tradition demanded. No soap, no scent, just water and breath. The ritual was not about cleanliness, it was about surrender. He dried himself with the linen cloth his wife once embroidered. She had sewn tiny barley stalks into the edge, believing in beauty even during grief. He held the fabric for a moment, breathing in memory. Then he folded it and placed it beneath the window, beneath the flickering candle that still burned for her. The time had come. He turned to the table and reached for the mask. It was heavier than he remembered, not in weight, in presence, as if it knew, as if it could feel the truth inside him. He lifted it, cradling it like a fragile thing, and raised it to his face. For a moment, the world stopped. The mask settled against his skin with unnatural ease, the bark molding to his forehead, the feathers brushing his ears. The eye holes darkened, the air grew thinner, and in that second, just a second, he heard something behind the silence, a breath, not his own. He froze, but then it was gone. The path to the silo was lit by lanterns, placed in the soil at intervals, flickering yellow through the fog. They had always done this, a procession of light to guide the chosen man toward the offering place. There were no words spoken, no watchers, only the silence and the walk. Elias stepped barefoot into the dirt. The earth was cold, damp. It gave slightly beneath each step, as if remembering the ones who had come before. The mask distorted his vision just enough to blur the edges of the world, not darkness, but something close. The walk was short, it always had been, but tonight it felt endless. Each step pulled something from him, not pain, something older, the feeling of becoming smaller, less himself, like a thread being unspooled and left behind in the dirt. He passed the fields, now empty after the last harvest,
The stalks had been cleared, but the soil still carried the memory of life. In the mist, the ground seemed to breathe. And then the silo appeared. A tall, hollow tower of wood and rusted metal, surrounded by stones and silent crows. No door barred the entrance, only a single line of red paint across the frame, a warning or an invitation. He stepped inside. The interior of the silo was colder than the outside. The air was thick, as if it had not been stirred in years. It smelled of old grain and wet bark. The walls were lined with carvings, crude spirals, handprints, faces with hollow eyes. At the center, a circle of ash. He moved to it slowly, the mask still pressed against his skin, his breath echoing within it. He knelt. He closed his eyes. He waited. This was the part no one remembered. The night alone, the rite. But Elias remembered everything. He remembered the last time, 10 years ago, when he had knelt just like this. He remembered how the silence stretched and bent, how it grew so loud he could hear his own heartbeat, how after a while he didn't know if he was kneeling or floating or buried. And then something came, not a voice, not a figure, just a presence, something that curled around him like roots through flesh, something that whispered not in words, but in want. He gave it what it asked. Back then, it was only a memory, a forgotten anger, a dream that no longer mattered. But now, it wanted more, and he would not give it to her, not her, not Lyra. He placed his hands over the ash and whispered a blessing, the words they had taught him, hollow words, empty now. He spoke them with a steady voice, masking the defiance in his heart. He bowed. He scraped a handful of ash into his palm and let it fall. He waited for the presence, but nothing came, nothing, except the cold. And then he stood. The rite was done. At least, it would appear so. He had fulfilled the shape of it, but not its substance. He walked to the far wall, where the carvings faded into wood rot, and sat with his back against the boards. The mask still covered his face, the feathers brushing against the silo walls like fingers. The crows outside had fallen silent. His heart beat loud in the hush, and somewhere deep beneath the soil, something began to stir. Just before dawn, Elias opened his eyes. He had not slept, not really. He had drifted, maybe, somewhere between thought and dream, but sleep had not come. The silo had remained still. The presence never returned. The mask had grown heavy, suffocating, as if disappointed. But he had endured. The door creaked open as the first light touched the fields. No one greeted him. That was tradition, too. The chosen man returned in silence, no words until the morning after, no acknowledgement, as if the village itself held its breath until it saw the crops again. Elias stepped into the mist. It was thinner now, not gone, but fading. The lanterns had burned down to embers, the crows had scattered, and the earth was quiet, too quiet. He walked the path alone, the mask still on his face, his feet caked in ash and dirt. When he reached his house, he removed the mask and placed it by the door. The candle in the window still burned. He whispered her name. Then he closed the door behind him and sat at the table, his hands shaking just enough to spill the water he poured. He had done it. The rite was complete. No one would know what he had withheld. No one would suspect. He had kept her. And outside, in the soil, something older than memory opened its eyes.
The night did not end when Elias returned. It stretched, lingering like a breath held too long, as if the morning had forgotten how to arrive. Elias sat in his kitchen, still cloaked in the silence of the silo. The candle in the window burned lower, its flame wavering, unsure of its place. Outside, the mist hadn't lifted. It clung to the village like old grief, thick, unmoving, heavy. He hadn't slept, not truly, but his eyes were dry and his thoughts were sharp. He told himself it was over, that he had done enough, that the ritual, with all its masks and ash and silence, had been satisfied. But deep down, something waited in his blood, some quiet guilt that pulsed behind his ribs. He had lied, not in words, but in offering. He had gone into the silo and spoken the rite, yes. He had knelt and bowed and whispered the words they taught, but he had not given what the Harvest Father demands. He had not surrendered her. And now, the earth knew. By noon, the mist remained. The villagers stirred, slowly, cautiously, as if stepping into a world half-formed. The children played in hushed tones, their laughter dulled by the fog. Farmers stood at the edge of their fields, watching for signs, green shoots, damp soil, the first birdsong of autumn's blessing. But nothing came, no bloom, no warmth, just silence. Elias watched from his window. No one approached. That too was tradition. For a full day after the rite, the chosen man was left alone. It was said the Spirit clung to him for a time, a residue of holiness or madness or both. He lit Lyra's candle again. This time, it flickered blue at the base. He noticed. He said nothing. That evening, he dreamed of crows. They filled the sky like ash, a swirling black storm above the silo. They didn't caw. They screamed, a sound like tearing skin, like splintered wood dragged across stone. In the dream, Elias stood in the field wearing the mask. But he wasn't himself. His hands were roots, his skin bark. His breath came out in wheezing gusts of dust and soil. And something deep beneath him was moving, shifting, rising. He turned to run, but he had no legs, only stalks. And as he screamed, the earth opened and the Harvest Father climbed through. He awoke with dirt under his fingernails. He sat up slowly, breathing hard, the remnants of the dream clinging like cobwebs. His house was quiet, but something had changed. There was a smell in the air, faint but unmistakable, damp, sweet, the scent of rot just beginning. He stood and checked the windows, all closed, the door still bolted, the mask still by the door, untouched. And yet, something was inside. He turned toward the kitchen table. The candle was out. The linen cloth beneath it, Lyra's cloth, had curled at the corners as if burned. He picked it up and brought it to his face. No scent of fire, but the barley stitches were missing, as if someone had unpicked them thread by thread. The next morning, the first sign appeared. A rabbit,
found in the northern field by a young boy. It had been born that night, small, weak, and wrong. Its ears were fused together. Its eyes were open but empty, filmed over with white. And its hind legs were twisted backwards like broken sticks forced into shape. The elders were told. They examined it in silence, their faces grim. "It happens," one of them said too quickly. "A fluke, a bad pairing." But they knew. Even if they would not say it, the rite had been rejected. The silence of the village thickened. 2 more animals were born that week, a calf with no mouth, a lamb with 2 heads. The crops began to wilt. The wheat at the edge of the fields blackened at the tips, the barley curled inward like fists. And yet no one dared accuse. Elias walked through the village each morning, his coat pulled tight, his face calm. No one met his eyes. No one spoke his name. They nodded quickly, politely, and then turned away. He was the man who wore the mask, and something had followed him home. On the 7th day, he returned from the woods with kindling in his arms and froze. There, in the center of the village square, a scarecrow. Not unusual in itself. They were placed in the fields every season, but this one was different. It stood alone, not in a field, but on the stone platform where the lottery box had been placed just a week before. Its arms were outstretched, crooked. Its head was not straw, but bark, and it wore a faded green dress. Lyra's dress, the one she wore every autumn, the one she had been buried in. Elias dropped the kindling. He stumbled forward, heart pounding, breath caught somewhere between a scream and a prayer. He touched the fabric. It was real, soft, worn, still stained at the hem with the wine she had spilled the year she danced in the orchard. He turned to the nearest villager, a woman named Tess, who had known Lyra for years. "Do you see this?" he asked, voice low. She frowned. "See what?" He pointed. "The Scarecrow! That dress!" But her eyes passed over it as if it weren't there. "What dress?" she asked, gently. "Elias, are you all right?" He looked back. The Scarecrow was still there, still weeping blood from the eyes, still standing with Lyra's smile stitched across its face. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat by the window, candle lit, knife on the table. He watched the square. The Scarecrow did not move, but the mist crept closer, thicker, hungrier. And in the candle's flicker, he saw something shift beneath the soil outside. A hand, maybe, or a root, or something between the two. The harvest father, he thought, digging through the earth, not for crops, but for what was promised and denied, for what had been buried, incomplete.
The fields died first. Not all at once and not dramatically. No fire, no storm, just a quiet withering, the kind you almost don't notice until it's too late. The green dulled, the stalks leaned, the soil beneath them turned soft and sour, the worms retreating deep into the earth. What had once been a promise of abundance now hung heavy with silence. No hum of bees, no flutter of sparrows, just wind and dust, and the occasional snap of brittle stems giving up. The villagers said little at first. They tightened their mouths, worked longer, prayed harder. It wasn't unheard of, they reasoned. Sometimes the seasons shifted. Sometimes the rain lingered too long or not at all. Sometimes the ground simply needed rest. But they all knew. Deep down, they knew. Something had been broken, and something was coming to collect. Elias kept to himself. Each morning he walked the edge of his land, watching the black creep in. It moved like mold across a forgotten wall, slow, silent, inevitable. By the end of the second week, his barley had collapsed entirely. Not harvested, not stolen, just fallen, as if something below had tugged the roots loose and swallowed the strength out of them. He tried to replant once, his hands in the dirt, knees on the ground, a prayer on his lips he didn't believe. But when he pressed his fingers into the soil, something pressed back. Not a hand, not a rock, just pressure, like breath, like waiting. He never went back after that. The Scarecrow remained. No one else seemed to see it. No one else ever spoke of it. But Elias saw it every day, closer than before. It no longer stood in the village square. It had moved to the edge of the path that led to his home. It didn't walk, it didn't turn, but each sunrise brought it a step nearer. And its arms were outstretched now, not in welcome, but in accusation. The bark mask on its face had split slightly, revealing something red beneath. Not paint, not fabric, something wet. He tried once to pull it down. He approached in broad daylight, hands clenched, heart hammering. He gripped the wooden frame that held its spine straight, ready to rip it from the ground. But as soon as he touched it, the air thickened. The wind stopped. And for one breathless moment, the sky above him filled with crows. Hundreds of them, circling, screaming, blotting out the sun. He stepped back, and they vanished. The Scarecrow didn't move, but he swore it was smiling. On the third week, the livestock began to change. The first was a goat born with two mouths, one on its face, the other on its side. It cried day and night, both mouths gnashing, never satisfied. Then came the chickens, their eyes sealed shut, their feathers patchy, their bones too soft to stand. But worst of all were the calves. They were born silent, no bleating, no breath, just stillness, and then bleeding from the nose, the eyes, the ears, as if something inside had tried to escape and failed. The villagers began to whisper. Not aloud, not yet, but in glances, in the way they closed their doors when Elias passed, in the way mothers pulled children behind them as he walked by. Something was wrong, and everyone knew who had worn the mask, even if they dared not say it. Elder Marin came to him one evening, unannounced, no cloak, no ceremony, just a woman with gray hair and eyes too sharp for her age. He opened the door without speaking. She stepped inside and looked around, at the candle still burning, at the dress folded carefully on the shelf, at the mask now hung on the wall, high and out of reach. "You kept her," she said. It wasn't a question. Elias said nothing. Marin walked to the table and sat. She didn't ask permission. "There are rules for a reason. You may not remember, but I do. The last man who refused to give up what was asked, his child vanished. No scream, no struggle, just gone. And when we tried to speak of him, we found we couldn't." Elias's jaw clenched. "You expect me to forget her?" "I expect you to feed the earth," she said.
It doesn't want her. It wants your grief. You tried to keep it, and now it grows hungry." He stared at her, voice low. "You buried your husband. Did you offer him?" Her lips twitched. "I did." "And did you forget him?" She looked away. "That's the mistake people make," she whispered. "They think letting go means forgetting. But it's not memory the Harvest Father takes. It's the part of you that clings." She stood, and for the first time her voice shook. "Let go, Elias, before it takes everything else." And then she was gone. That night the dreams changed. He stood again in the field, the crows screaming above, the mask fused to his face. But this time the earth beneath him was not earth at all. It was bone, pale, cracked, stretched in every direction, like a skeleton buried just beneath the skin of the world. And from between the ribs, something began to rise. Not the Harvest Father, Lyra. But not as she was. She moved like water, her joints wrong, her eyes full of smoke, her mouth hung open, too wide. Her voice was wind through a grave. "Why didn't you give me up?" she asked. Elias couldn't answer. "I didn't want to stay, but now I'm caught, in the soil, in the roots, in the blood." She reached for him, and the moment her fingers touched his skin, he awoke, screaming, sweating, shaking. There was dirt on his floor, dirt on his hands, and by the door, a single crow feather, still warm. The next morning 3 people were missing, an old man, a child, and the village butcher. No blood, no trail, no sign of struggle. Their homes stood open as if they'd simply walked out and forgotten how to return. And when the names were spoken, something strange happened. People paused, blinking, frowning. "I don't remember him," one woman muttered. "Was he tall? He had a daughter, didn't he?" "No," someone else said. "I think he lived alone." A moment later, they were discussing the weather, as if no one had ever gone missing. Elias stood in the square, watching, and beside him, the Scarecrow, now at his gate, the blood on its face no longer fresh, but thick, dark, curdled, and its eyes had moved. Now they were staring straight at him.
At first, the villagers laughed. It appeared overnight, a scarecrow in the center of the village square, arms out like wings, head tilted just slightly, as if listening to something only it could hear. Someone had dressed it in an old green dress, cinched at the waist with twine. The sleeves danced in the morning wind like they were filled with invisible arms. "Someone's playing a trick," they muttered. "A harvest joke. Must have been the boys from the East End." But the laughter never reached their eyes, because no one remembered building it, and no one wanted to touch it. Elias knew the dress. He knew it before he even saw the full figure, before he stepped close enough to see the frayed stitching at the hem, the faded wine stain over the left hip, the tiny row of mismatched buttons running down the back like a spine. He knew the way it moved, the way it used to hang off Lyra's shoulders when she danced barefoot in the barley fields, her hair braided with dried thistle and golden twine. That dress had been buried with her. He'd folded it himself. He'd kissed it. He'd placed it beneath her cold hands, tucked gently over her ribs. And now here it was, worn by a figure stitched from straw and bark and things that shouldn't move, but did. Only when no one was watching. The villagers didn't see it the way he did. They noticed it, yes, commented, joked, frowned, but no one seemed disturbed. No one saw the blood weeping from its eyes.
No one saw the small black insects crawling in and out of its mouth. No one felt the cold it gave off, the kind that settled deep in your chest and made your breath steam in the warm air of dusk. Only Elias. Only him. He tried to move it once, just after midnight when the streets were empty and the fog rolled low across the stones like a slinking animal. He carried a lantern and a spade, not to dismantle it, not yet, just to dig beneath it, to see if the roots of something worse had taken hold. The air grew colder the closer he got. The wind stopped entirely, and the lantern began to flicker. He knelt and pressed the spade into the soil. The earth hissed. And then something whispered in the dark, not out loud, but inside his skull, a voice that wasn't a voice. "She is not yours anymore." The wind returned all at once, hard and sharp. It knocked him onto his back. The lantern died, and when he sat up, the Scarecrow was facing him. Its head had turned, its arms lowered by inches, and in its mouth, sewn shut with thread made of hair, something pulsed. He ran and did not return until morning. The next day, no one remembered the butcher. Not his name, not his shop, not the sharp laughter that once came from behind the counter, not the daughter who used to braid her hair with feathers and dance through the fields. Elias remembered. He remembered her favorite song. He remembered her wedding held beneath the hawthorn tree. But when he said her name out loud, the villagers blinked. "Who? There's no one by that name. Are you feeling all right?" Even the butcher's home stood empty, not abandoned, not vandalized, just clean, sterile, like no one had ever lived there at all. He opened the door once. Inside, everything was gone. Furniture, photographs, dust. Even the smell was gone, as if the house had never been touched by life, as if it had always been waiting for something else to move in. Each morning, the Scarecrow was closer, inches at first, then feet. It moved without moving, never seen, never heard, but undeniably relocated. One day it stood by the well, the next by the bakery, then at the edge of the schoolyard where the children no longer played, and then at the base of Elias's gate. Its hands now outstretched fully, palms up, like someone begging to be remembered, and its mouth. The thread had snapped. Now it hung open, and the sound of buzzing flies never stopped. Elias stopped sleeping. He began to keep a notebook, recording names, faces, memories. Each time someone disappeared, he wrote everything he could before the forgetting set in. By the end of the week, he had filled 3 pages. Old Simon, who played the fiddle at the spring feasts. Martha, who used to bake honey cakes and ham them out at first frost. Father Delvin, whose sermons were once so loud the birds would fly from the steeple. All gone. And when he asked about them, no one remembered. The pages began to blur. He rewrote them again and again until the names began to slip from his own mind. One night, he returned home to find muddy footprints on his floor, small, bare, leading from the door to the candle in the window. The flame had gone out. The linen cloth beneath it was missing. He turned fast, breath caught in his throat, and standing in the open doorway was a girl, not quite a child, not quite alive. Her skin was gray, her eyes entirely black, wide and endless, like twin wells dug too deep. She didn't speak, just lifted her hand and pointed behind him to the place where the candle had been. Elias turned. There, in its place, was the cloth, folded perfectly, but now stitched with a spiral he hadn't sewn. A familiar spiral, the same one carved into the ritual token, the same one branded into the chest of the first man who had vanished. He looked back at the girl. She was gone. Only the scent of soil remained. The next morning, the villagers woke to a sound none of them could explain. A crying, high-pitched, slow, endless. It came from the square. They gathered, slowly, cautiously, like sheep circling a hole in the ground. The Scarecrow stood in the same spot as before, but now it wept. Not tears, not water, blood. Thick, dark rivulets streaming down from its eyes, soaking the dress. It made no sound, but from the mouths of every crow on every rooftop, the sound of weeping echoed. And still, no one could remember who had put it there. No one could bring themselves to tear it down. They simply stood, staring, waiting, like crops before the blade. Elias watched from his window. The candle flickered again, this time blue and black. He whispered Lyra's name. He whispered apologies. He whispered prayers. But nothing changed. The Scarecrow waited. The village rotted. And in the fields, the earth began to crack, as if something beneath it wanted out.
The forgetting didn't happen all at once. It crept in like fog beneath a door, silent, slow, unnoticed until everything familiar had softened at the edges. At first it was small things, a name misplaced on the tongue, a birthday unspoken, a habit remembered only after it was lost. But then the absences grew larger. People began to vanish, and the village simply adjusted. No one questioned empty chairs. No one knocked on missing doors. No one mourned, because no one remembered, except Elias. He kept his notebook close now, tucked inside his coat, pressed to his chest like a second heart. The pages were creased and dirty, ink smudged by rain and sweat and shaking hands, but the names inside were sacred. He wrote them every day, over and over, in the morning, at dusk, before sleep. Each entry a prayer against the erasure. Thomas Greer built the grain mill by hand. Sarah Ellis braided wildflowers into her hair every spring. John Holloway, father to twins, laughed like thunder. He wrote them down, because no one else would. Because soon, even he might forget. It began with the teacher, Miss Renna. Young, sharp, kind, a woman who read to the children from books she brought from the city and who hummed old lullabies when the fog rolled in. One morning her schoolhouse stood locked and cold. No candles in the windows, no chalk on the board, no laughter in the yard. Elias asked the baker, "Where's Miss Renna?" The man blinked, frowned. "Who?" "The school teacher." "What school?" Elias turned and stared at the schoolhouse, cracked windows, vines climbing the stone. It had always been like that, hadn't it? Hadn't it? He went to her home, empty. The door swung on broken hinges. Inside, dust and quiet. But on the table, a teacup, still warm. And beside it, a book, open to the last page of The Wishing Tree, her favorite to read aloud. A single feather rested on top, black, gleaming, soft. Elias picked it up and felt something curl beneath his ribs, a sensation like memory unraveling. He shoved the feather into his pocket and left without closing the door. By evening, the house was gone.
In its place, a patch of bare soil, and no one else noticed. That night, he dreamed of the spiral, not carved, not drawn, grown. Out of the fields, out of the rooftops, out of the skin of the people he once knew. The Scarecrow stood at the center, taller now, its dress shredded, its bark mask cracked wide to reveal a mouth full of crows. They flapped inside her like a second heart, and behind her, the Harvest Father. Massive, rooted, faceless, digging. Always digging. Each shovelful of dirt spilled more names into the void. Each turn of the spiral pulled them further away. Elias woke to find his own name missing from his notebook. He flipped back through the pages, dozens of names, stories, descriptions, but where his own should be, nothing. Not even a blank line, just absence. He wrote it in slowly. Elias Dorn, keeper of the list, husband to Lyra, mask-bearer of the year gone wrong. The ink refused to dry. It smeared, ran, bled into the fibers like rot. By morning, it had vanished again. The Scarecrow had moved. It now stood in front of the chapel, the one place untouched by decay, where rituals once meant something, where the elders gathered in whispered hope. Its arms were raised now, not in welcome, in mockery, in triumph. The villagers gathered, wide-eyed, drawn by some pull they didn't understand. Who put that there? I don't remember. Did we always have 2 chapels? There was only one. There had always only been one. But the spiral worked its way through memory like a worm in fruit, turning sweetness to rot. Elder Marin tried to bless the ground. She knelt before the Scarecrow with incense and fire and trembling lips. She spoke the old words. She called on the rites. She begged for silence to become mercy. The Scarecrow tilted its head, and Elder Marin forgot her own name mid-prayer. She stood up slowly, looked around, and asked, "Where am I?" She wandered into the fields. She never came back. And the next morning, her house was gone too. Elias tried to warn the others. He carried his notebook through the village, shoving it into hands, pointing to the pages, shouting names. "This man, he carved the church pews. She raised your daughter when your wife was sick. You danced at his wedding. You cried at her funeral." But they stared at him like a madman, kind, pitying. They said, "You must be mistaken. There's no one by that name. I think maybe you should rest." They smiled and returned to their empty routines, their half-lives, their dying harvest. He visited the cemetery next. Only a few stones remained, weathered, cracked, but where once there had been dozens, now there were less than 10. Even the graves were being erased. Even the dead were being unburied, not in body, but in memory. And without memory, they were truly gone. The spiral was winning. The Harvest Father was still digging, and the soil was almost hollow. That night, he dreamed of Lyra, not as she had been, warm, laughing, humming to herself in the early mornings. No, this version was cracked. Eyes white, mouth stitched with crow feathers, fingers blooming with roots. She touched my face and whispered, "You didn't lose me. You refused to let me go. And now, I can't leave. She opened her mouth, and the wind screamed through it. When he woke, he couldn't remember the color of her eyes. The candle in the window had gone black, not extinguished, black, like it was burning nothing, or something far worse. And when he opened his notebook that morning, the pages were blank, not torn, not stained, just blank. Like he'd never written at all, like he'd never tried to remember. And in the corner of the last page, a new spiral had appeared, drawn in his own handwriting.
They found him at the silo again. Elias, barefoot in the morning frost, standing in the ash circle where he had once knelt and lied. The earth beneath him pulsed, not with life, but with memory. He could feel it now, just beneath the surface, something moving, something ancient, turning slowly in the dark. He hadn't slept in 3 nights. The candle had melted to wax and bone. His notebook was gone. Not stolen, not misplaced, just forgotten. And every name he once remembered now hovered just out of reach, like words half-formed on the tip of a fading dream. The villagers no longer spoke to him. They passed him like a shadow, not cruel, not angry, just indifferent, like he was a thing already gone. Only the crows acknowledged him now, watching from rooftops, lining fences, circling above wherever he walked, silent, patient, endless. But not everyone had forgotten. 3 still remembered. The elders, or what was left of them. Elias found them in the chapel, where the walls bled sap and the windows had gone opaque with frost. Elder Tam sat in the first pew, muttering to himself, fingernails blackened, eyes too wide. Elder Rowan rocked slowly back and forth in a chair that creaked with every breath, whispering lullabies to no one. And Elder Marin had returned, but different. She moved with slowness now, not age, but weight, as if she carried something inside her the rest of them couldn't see. When Elias entered, none of them looked up. He stood in the center of the chapel and said simply, "I broke the rite." The wind howled outside. And then, finally, they spoke. "You didn't break it," Marin said, her voice like bark peeling from wood. "You paused it. You confused it." Elias stepped closer. "It's taking them, one by one." Rowan nodded without looking. "It doesn't take. It unroots." "Same thing." "No," Marin whispered. "Worse." She turned her gaze to him, and her eyes were bleeding. Thin tears of red traced her cheeks, soaking into her collar, but she didn't wipe them, didn't even seem to notice. "You didn't give what was owed, and so now the land forgets, the people, the places, the names, all turning to rot." "I gave myself," Elias whispered. "You gave nothing," she snapped, sudden and sharp. "You wore the mask, you said the words, but you held on to what should have been buried." "I couldn't let her go." "Then you should not have drawn the spiral." Rowan coughed, a dry, rattling sound, and said, "You think the mask makes you the one in control. It doesn't. It makes you the door." Elias blinked. "To what?" "To him," Tam muttered, still staring at the altar. The one beneath, the first root, the one who feeds and forgets, the harvest father. I thought he was just a story. He is, Marin said, a story that grew teeth. They told him the truth then, the parts the villagers weren't allowed to remember. How the rite had not always been symbolic, that once it required real loss, not a prayer, not a gesture, but grief. Raw, total, a severing. Every mask bearer gave something real, a child, a love, a limb, not in blood, but in memory, in release. They had to choose to give it up, fully, without hesitation, and if they did, then the land gave back balance, abundance, peace. But if they didn't, then the harvest father would come looking, digging, unraveling, until he found something to bury in its place. Elias sank to the floor. His hands trembled. I didn't know. We all knew. You just didn't want to believe it. He looked up at her, voice cracking. Is there a way to stop it? Silence. Then Rowan spoke. There's a second rite, older, forgotten, dangerous. Tam shook his head violently. It's not safe, not clean. It costs too much. It costs everything, Marin added. I'll do it, Elias said, without hesitation. You don't know what it asks, she warned. He stood. I don't care. She looked at him for a long time, and then she nodded. That night, they brought him to the stone circle outside the village, long abandoned, half swallowed by moss and fog. It had once been the heart of the ritual, before the silo, before the chapel, before the forgetting. The stones hummed with cold. At the center, a pit, old, bottomless, where offerings had once been whispered into the dark, not thrown, not burned, but given, in silence. Marin handed him a curved blade, not for blood, but for cutting loose. He was to take everything that still tethered him to Lyra, every memory, every scent, every thread, and cast it into the pit. Not symbolically, literally. He had to bring what remained, the dress, the cloth, the ring, the candle, the spiral, and something more. The one thing he had never told anyone, the last thing she'd said to him. He hesitated, hands trembling, heart breaking all over again. But then he heard it, the crying, distant, high, inhuman, from every field, every window, every well. The harvest father was awake. He was walking now, not beneath the earth, above it, each footstep pulling more names into the spiral. Elias stepped to the edge of the pit and began. He spoke her name. Once, twice, a third time, and it hurt more than dying. He dropped the candle in first, then the ring, then the cloth, then the feathered mask, and finally, the truth. She had been pregnant again. She didn't tell him. He found the note only afterwards. A single sentence. Don't be afraid to love again.
He burned it and dropped the ashes into the dark. The earth groaned, the spirals shuddered, the Scarecrow screamed, and the fog recoiled. Marin wept. Tam collapsed. Rowan vanished before their eyes, smiling as if he'd been waiting to be forgotten. And Elias knelt, empty, hollowed, released. The silence wrapped around him like a grave, and in the distance, the crows began to sing.
The village did not celebrate. There were no bells, no sunrise chorus, no change in the air. Elias had performed the second rite, the dangerous one, the whispered one, the one even the elders feared, and still the fog remained. Thinner, yes, but still there, laced through the fields like veins, caught in the branches of the dying trees, crawling through open windows and across sleeping faces. The earth had listened, but it had not yet answered, and the harvest father was not finished digging. Elias no longer slept at home. His cottage felt too close, too fragile, like a mouth waiting to swallow him whole. So instead, he slept in the silo, wrapped in a threadbare blanket, cradling the knife Marin had given him. It still smelled of ash and rain. Each night he lay awake beneath the hollow rafters, staring up at the carvings, spirals, faces, hands, worn nearly smooth by time. He had traced them with his fingers once. They pulsed then. Not anymore. Now they felt dry, empty, like scars left behind by something that had already fed. But the ground was never still. At first it was faint, a subtle tremor, a pulse like something breathing just beneath the soil. Then came the scraping, not loud, not constant, but steady, a dry, rhythmic sound like fingers scratching at the underside of a coffin lid. It came from deep beneath the silo, and it never stopped. By the third day, Elias could no longer ignore it. He pressed his ear to the floor. The sound was clearer now. Digging. Not shovels, not tools. Hands. Pulling, ripping, burrowing through roots and bone and centuries of forgotten things. He dug his fingers into the floorboards, desperate to feel where it was coming from. And that's when he felt it. A heartbeat. Not his, not human. Slow, heavy, rooted. Each thud made his teeth ache. And then a whisper, barely audible, barely real. You tried to bury the grief, but you never buried yourself. He left the silo at dawn. The village was still asleep. Or maybe it wasn't. He couldn't tell anymore. The houses looked smaller somehow, crooked, faded, like drawings left in the rain. A child stood at the edge of the well, motionless. Elias approached slowly. "Where's your mother?" he asked. The child turned. No eyes, no mouth, just smooth, pale skin where a face should be. The shape of a face someone had forgotten how to finish. And then it was gone. No sound, no trace, just empty air, and a single crow feather drifting to the ground. The Scarecrow had moved again. Now it stood behind the chapel. Its arms were longer, its spine twisted like rope, The bark mask on its face had cracked open into a grin. Something inside it pulsed. Elias stepped closer, not out of bravery, out of necessity. He needed to know what still held the village in its grip. The spiral had loosened, yes, but it had not lifted. There was something still unoffered, something still owed. He reached forward, touched the hem of the dress, and heard the scream. Not with his ears, with his bones. The fabric disintegrated beneath his fingers, turning to ash. And in the soil beneath his feet, he felt fingers, cold, wet, grasping upward, digging, still digging. He ran, not toward home, not toward the silo, but to the grave. Lyra's grave. The hawthorn tree still stood, brittle, leafless, humming with the sound of insects that had no names. He knelt, dug with bare hands. The dirt came up too easily, like it wanted to be removed. 6 inches down, the coffin. 3 more, the lid. He opened it. Empty. No body, no dress. Just spirals carved into the wood. Hundreds of them, all pointing inward, to nothing, to absence, to hunger. He staggered back, shaking, breath catching in his throat. And from behind the tree, the Scarecrow stepped forward. Not floated, not vanished, stepped, 1 foot at a time. Its joints cracked with every movement. Its eyes bled sap. Its chest opened like a door. Inside, a hollow, a dark cavity lined with straw and bone and something still beating. He fell to his knees, and the Scarecrow knelt too, mirroring him, mocking him. And then it spoke, in Lyra's voice. You gave the pieces, but you never gave the whole. And then it smiled and began to dig, right there beside the grave, with her hands, his hands, hands made of everything he never let go of. He didn't sleep that night. He sat beside the open grave, listening to the sound of the Scarecrow, still digging, deeper, slower, more deliberate now, not for her, not for him, for what came next. Because when you deny the offering, the earth finds something else to take, and it always takes more than you're willing to lose.
She came with the second fog, not the gray mist that cloaked the village each dawn like breath on a mirror. No, this one was different. It was darker, thicker, sweet-smelling, like wet leaves and spoiled fruit. It rolled in after midnight, silent, absolute, and with it came the girl. She stood at the edge of Elias's field, barefoot in the frost, a white dress clinging to her knees, hair long and tangled like dry roots. She didn't move, didn't wave, didn't blink. She didn't need to, because she had no eyes, just smooth, pale skin stretched across where sight should be. And yet somehow she saw everything. Elias didn't scream when he saw her. He only watched, from his porch, lantern in one hand, knife in the other. She stood in silence for what felt like hours. The fog curled around her like a veil. Behind her, the Scarecrow leaned against the well, arms folded like a priest at prayer. Then finally, the girl lifted one hand and pointed toward the forest, toward the old paths no one had walked in generations. Then she turned
and walked. No sound, no hesitation, just vanished into the trees. Elias followed, because what else was there left to do? The forest had changed. Once it had been thin, filled with songbirds and deer paths, golden light pouring through the canopy. Now it was something else. The trees leaned inward, whispering to one another. Their bark pulsed. Their roots shifted beneath the ground, making the path feel like a living thing, breathing, twitching, waiting. Elias moved slowly, lantern held low. Every few feet he found something left behind, a thread of white cloth, a tiny bare footprint in the mud, a single feather driven into the bark like a nail. And then, after what felt like hours, he reached the clearing, where time bent and memory forgot to hold on. The girl stood at the center, surrounded by stones carved with spirals, dozens of them, all identical, all ancient. They pulsed faintly in the lantern light, not glowing, but breathing. Elias stepped closer, and finally the girl spoke. Her voice was soft, wrong, like wind through the ribs of something dead. You buried her with hope. That was your first mistake. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. She continued. You lit a candle every night, thinking the flame would hold her. But fire doesn't warm the dead. It just reminds them what they've lost. And you, Elias Thorne, you kept the pieces, the ring, the cloth, the whisper. You fed the land symbols and thought that was enough. But the harvest father does not eat symbols. He eats what you love, not what you own. She reached into the air, pulled something from it, like smoke made solid. A vision, a memory. Lyra standing in the kitchen of their cottage, singing softly to herself as she chopped herbs. Sunlight on her neck, a smudge of flour on her cheek. You never let this go, she said. This moment, this illusion of peace. The vision faded, replaced by another. Lyra in bed, pale, cold, her lips blue. Elias beside her, holding her hand, whispering that everything would be okay. You lied, she said, and you kept lying, even after her heart stopped. The trees shuddered, the ground trembled. From beneath the clearing, something shifted, like stone dragged across bone. She tilted her head. He's almost here. He's nearly broken through. And when he rises, you won't be remembered. You'll be replaced. He took a step back. I did the second rite. Yes, she said, but you kept your guilt. You mourned the loss. You never gave the weight of it. Now it grows heavier, and when it bursts, everything breaks. She stepped closer, reached out, pressed her fingers to his forehead. They were cold, so cold. There is one more thing he wants. He doesn't want her anymore. He wants you. He gasped, fell to his knees. The world twisted, colors bleeding, wind screaming. Trees bending into shapes that shouldn't exist. The ground opened, not with a crack, but with a sigh. And from beneath, a spiral of roots rose, tangled, black, wet. At the center, a face, not a human one, not truly. Bark and bone and rot and teeth made of stone, and no eyes, only hunger. The harvest, Father. The girl stepped back, vanished into the fog, and Elias was alone. Except he wasn't. The forest closed around him. The roots reached for his feet. The face beneath the earth breathed, and somewhere far off, the Scarecrow began to laugh. Not loud, not cruel, just soft. Like someone remembering a joke at the end of the world.
There had always been a story, told in whispers, told to children, told during harvest season, when the air grew dry and the corn stood taller than a man's head. A story of the harvest father, the masked spirit carved from bark and crowned with crow feathers, a guardian, a giver, a god older than God. The story said he fed the fields. The story said he asked for one man each year. The story said the chosen would wear the mask, kneel in the silo, speak the offering rite, and return in the morning, hollow but whole. The story lied. Or worse, it forgot. Elias didn't return to the village after the forest. He wandered. Through the trees, through the ash, through the broken pieces of memories that no longer had names. He saw things now, not visions, not ghosts, but truths buried beneath ritual and repetition. He saw the first silo, not a building, but a pit, lined with stone, marked by handprints. He saw the original mask, not carved, but grown from the corpse of a tree that had fed on blood. And he saw the first offering, not a man, a mother, sobbing as she placed her stillborn child into the hollow, not as sacrifice, as remembrance. Because the rite had never been about food. It had always been about grief. Somewhere along the way, they had twisted it, cleaned it, sanitized it, hid its purpose behind symbols and ceremonies. The spiral became a token, not a map. The mask became tradition, not transformation. And the offering rite, the sacred, sorrowful shedding of something real, became theater. Words without weight, kneeling without knowing, faith without loss. The land had tolerated it for a time, because land remembers. But memory is patient, and not without teeth. And now that Elias had defied the rite fully, utterly, defiantly, the land wanted everything back, with interest. He returned to the chapel on the fourth day, or what was left of it. The roof had caved in, the pews reduced to dust and moss. The altar cracked down the center, like a heart too long starved of truth. Only one figure remained, Tam. Crouched in a corner, mumbling nonsense, drawing spirals into the stone with a finger rubbed raw. Elias approached slowly. "Do you remember?" he asked. Tam looked up, eyes milky, lips bleeding from murmured prayers. "I remember the wrong things," he whispered. "The feast, the wine, the songs, none of it meant anything." He leaned forward, voice dropping to a breath. "We weren't feeding him." Elias frowned. "Then what were we doing?" Tam smiled. "We were distracting him. The rites weren't offerings, they were locks." The words settled into Elias's chest like a stone in wet soil. He turned and looked at the ruined altar. The carvings there weren't blessings, they were warnings.
symbols to confuse, spirals to delay, a mask not to summon, but to shield. They hadn't been honoring the Harvest Father. They'd been keeping him asleep. Every year, a piece of true sorrow, a thread of grief surrendered freely. That was the cost of forgetting what waited beneath the field. The moment the rite became performance, the locks began to crack. And now, he was waking. Not because Elias failed, but because the village had forgotten why it began at all. Outside, the sky had turned red, not with sunset, but with ash. The fields were on fire, but the flames gave no heat, only silence. The Scarecrow stood in the center of it all, arms spread, roots growing from its feet into the soil like veins feeding a heart. The mask on its face was gone. Now it wore Elias's, not the one from the ritual, his actual face. Eyes, mouth, worn like a memory, mocked. And at its chest, the bark peeled open to reveal a spiral, still spinning, still pulling, still hungry. Elias didn't scream. He had no voice left. The truth had taken it. Instead, he walked back to the silo, not to perform, not to beg, but to remember. Truly, fully. He lit a candle, placed it at the center, and knelt, not as a bearer of tradition, as a man who had buried someone he loved and refused to accept she was gone. And then, finally, he spoke not the offering rite, but the truth. I kept her because I couldn't live without her. I wore the mask but never let it in. I made the shape but never the sacrifice. I am sorry. I am ready. And in that moment, the spiral stopped spinning. The ground trembled, the silo groaned, and the roots retreated. Not fully, not forever, but enough. Enough to loosen the grip, enough to seal the wound, enough for the Harvest Father to pause, to sleep, for now. Outside, the Scarecrow crumbled into ash. The fog pulled back toward the trees, and a few names returned. Not all, but some. A child remembered her mother's lullaby. A man remembered the smell of his wife's bread. A woman remembered the prayer she whispered at her brother's grave. But no one remembered Elias, not even the ones who had once loved him, not even the ones he saved, because that was the price. A crooked rite corrected, but a name forgotten forever.
She came to him in silence, not in a dream, not in a vision. She simply appeared. One evening, as the mist thinned and the village slept, the kind of sleep that feels more like waiting, Elias returned to the silo, and she was already there. Lyra, standing where the ash circle used to be, wearing the green dress. But it no longer looked like fabric. It looked like moss grown over bone. And her hair, it swayed, but there was no wind. She didn't speak at first, just stared at him, not accusing, not forgiving, just there. Her eyes were not the color he remembered. They were darker now, deeper, like wells carved into bark. He stepped closer. She did not move. "I buried you," he whispered. Her head tilted gently. "I know," she said. Her voice was Lyra's, but behind it, something else breathed. Elias trembled. "I tried to forget you. I tried to remember you. I tried everything." She stepped forward. I know. Each footstep was soundless, but he could feel them through the floorboards, through his teeth. He wanted to reach for her, but didn't, because part of him already knew this was not the Lyra he lost. This was what remained of her after the grief had fermented, after love had curdled into guilt, after memory had sharpened into myth. A woman reborn not from womb or warmth, but from soil and sorrow. She touched his cheek. Her fingers were cold, but not dead, just unfinished. "I never wanted to stay," she said. Elias blinked. "But I lit the candle." "You lit it for yourself. I wore the mask. You wore it to avoid the truth." He lowered his eyes. The silence between them stretched until she spoke again. "You gave pieces, but never gave me up." He nodded, eyes burning. "I was afraid I'd lose you completely." Her expression softened, something almost kind flickering behind her voice. "You were supposed to." The Scarecrow had not been her, not truly. It was the shape his mind carved from guilt and resistance, the echo of what he refused to release. But this was different. This was the cost, and the mercy. She was still here not because he loved her too deeply, but because he couldn't bear to love her truthfully. Through the pain, through the absence, through the final silence. That's what the Harvest Father fed on. Not love, but the denial of loss. Elias finally understood. Lyra turned away, walked toward the silo wall where the carvings had begun to shift, the spirals unwound, the faces faded, and a door he had never noticed before now stood open. Behind it, darkness. Not evil, not death, just what comes next. She stepped toward it, paused, glanced back. "This is the last time, the last thread." Elias whispered her name. She smiled. "Let me go." And then she was gone. No sound, no farewell, just gone. He stood alone in the silo, truly alone, and for the first time in months, he felt peace. Not joy, not healing, but peace. Like a wound that had finally stopped bleeding. The ash circle faded. The knife he once clutched had rusted. The candle never lit again. And when he stepped out into the morning, the fog had lifted. The village stirred with confusion, not fear, just the sensation of waking from a long, deep sleep. Children asked where the Scarecrow had gone. Parents blinked at the fields, now green again, soft again, quiet again. And when someone asked Elias his name, he had to think, long and hard, before finally answering, "I don't think it matters anymore." And they nodded, smiled, moved on, because to them, he was no one, a man without roots, a man who had served his purpose and been erased, as all true offerings must be. The silence after her departure was the loudest sound Elias had ever heard. Not just quiet, emptiness. It echoed, it pulsed, it settled into the corners of his mind like ash drifting into cracks. There was no more mist, no more Scarecrow, no more spiral drawn in dirt. But the land still waited, and so did the Harvest Father. The rites were not done, because the harvest was not healed, only paused. And balance demands more than memory. It demands sacrifice. The second rite was older than any elder still breathing. Even Marin hadn't spoken of it in full, only fragments, half-truths wrapped in warnings, a ritual of last resort, a rite to close the wound when all else failed. Elias now understood why it was kept hidden, because it didn't ask for offerings, it asked for the offering itself. No tokens, no objects, no cloth, no feather, no ring. Only one thing remained to give: himself. Not his death, but his erasure. A soul turned inside out, a name undone, a life remembered by no one, not even him. He returned to the circle of stones in the forest, the same place the girl with no eyes had led him, the same clearing where time didn't move the same way. The trees had bowed now, their trunks bent inward, forming a crooked arch above the center stone, as if the forest itself had grown tired of pretending to be passive. He stood in the middle, alone. No elders, no crows, only the hum beneath his feet, like breath held too long. He knelt, one final time, and began the rite. There were no words, only intent. He closed his eyes, slowed his breath, and pictured himself, not as he wanted to be, not as he used to be, but as he truly was now. Faded, fractured, filled with someone else's grief. He whispered Lyra's name once, not to hold her, but to set her adrift. Then his own, and with that, the spiral began to burn. It didn't hurt, not at first, just warmth, like being held, like being absorbed. The spiral beneath him lit from within, not fire, not light, but memory unraveling. The carvings on the stone pulsed with life, then crumbled. His name, spoken seconds ago, already slipped from his mind. He tried to remember the sound of his voice. He couldn't. He opened his eyes and saw the trees bending lower now, weeping maybe, or bowing. The ground split, not wide, just enough. A sliver of soil peeled back to reveal the thing beneath. The Harvest Father, not in full form, but a mouth, a hollow, waiting. And Elias leaned forward. His hand touched the soil first, then his chest, then gently his forehead. He did not fall. He surrendered. Piece by piece, memory by memory, he let the earth take it. Not just pain, not just love, but everything in between. Every morning, every fight, every time Lyra brushed his hair from his eyes and said, "You're still here." He let that go too, and then there was nothing. No Elias, no voice, no grief, only soil, only balance. In the village, the crops bloomed overnight. Barley, wheat, beans, squash. Even the apple trees, once garnered with rot, now glowed red with fruit. The livestock stood taller, stronger. The children laughed again. No one asked where the fog had gone, or why the church bells rang without a hand to pull them. No one remembered the name of the last man to wear the mask. No one remembered there had ever been a mask at all. But deep beneath the grain silos, where the roots stretch long and patient, something slept,
fed, satisfied, for now. And far outside the village, deep in the woods, a single spiral remained, carved into the bark of a tree that had never bloomed. It pulsed once, then closed, as if it had never been there at all.
The village awoke to green, rich, alive, humid with promise. The rot was gone. The stalks stood tall again, reaching for the sky like they never remembered falling. Roots drank deep. The wind no longer whispered, it sang. Babies no longer cried in pain, livestock no longer bled without cause. The water ran clear, and no one questioned it. Not truly, because the forgetting had done its work. And when something is forgotten by everyone, it may as well have never happened at all. There was no monument for Elias Thorne, no grave, no story whispered on porches, not even a name on the ledger in the chapel, which had been rebuilt overnight, stronger than before, without a single hand raised to it. If someone asked who had worn the mask last harvest, the elders would blink, smile, shake their heads. There wasn't a rite last year, they'd say. The soil was kind to us on its own. And the others would nod, because it was easier to believe in kindness than cost. But the land knew. It remembered what had been fed. The silo stood unchanged, tall, empty, still shadowed. Children no longer dared to play near it. They didn't know why. They just didn't. And the field behind it, the one near the hawthorn tree, always grew faster, fuller, like it had tasted something no other patch of ground had, and liked it. In the forest, the spiral tree still stood, the bark smooth, untouched. But if you walked close, too close, and laid your ear to the trunk, you might hear something, a rhythm, a pulse, a breath. Not loud, not threatening, just waiting. Because the soil does not forget. It only sleeps, and it wakes when it grows hungry again. And one evening, years later maybe, a new fog will crawl down the mountain, a quiet one, polite, and the crows will return. They always do. They know the path. They know the price. And someone, somewhere, will be chosen to wear the mask, to kneel in silence, to give the grief the land demands. Because the harvest is never free. It only borrows from the living. And one way or another, the soil must be fed.
They say the land is generous. They say if you tend it, love it, and give it what it asks, it will feed you. But they never say what happens when you stop feeding it. Because by then, it's already too late. The crops wither, the names vanish, and the harvest father walks. Not as punishment, but as memory, returned. The season turned again. Autumn, leaves brittle with age, air sharp with stillness. The fog came early, low and quiet, wrapping the valley like a prayer no one remembered how to finish. The silo stood as it always had, the chapel too,
and the fields glowed gold under the slanted sun. It was, by all accounts, a good year. No one asked why. No one questioned what had changed. That was the way of things. When something terrible happens and is forgotten, the forgetting becomes a kind of mercy, a silent truce, until something breaks it. One morning, a child pointed toward the village square. "Who's that?" she asked. The others turned. A figure stood there, motionless, where no one had stood before. Not a scarecrow, not a man, something in between. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a torn white shirt stained with soil, a face covered in bark, a crown of crow feathers, and in his arms a bundle of wheat tied with red string. The villagers blinked, rubbed their eyes. When they looked again, he was gone. That night, the winds howled through the silo. No storm, no rain, just wind. And within it, a sound that could almost be a voice, a rasp, a breath, a name. But no one could make it out, because it wasn't meant for them. It was meant for the earth, and the earth remembered. By the next morning, a single spiral had been carved into the center of the chapel floor. No one had entered. No tool had touched the stone. It hadn't been made. It had grown. And beneath it, warmth, like something breathing beneath the stone. Something rising. In the fields, the crows began to gather. Not by the dozens, by the hundreds. They lined the rooftops, the fence posts, the silo. Their eyes sharp, still, unblinking, watching. Not the village, the soil. And the soil pulsed back. Once, then again, like a drumbeat from the heart of the world. On the third day, the fog didn't lift. It stayed, settled, thickened. By nightfall, you couldn't see your hand in front of your face, and through it, movement. Not fast, not cruel, just certain. Footsteps, heavy, dragging, soft thuds of bark against dirt. One by one, the lanterns went out, the bells stopped ringing, and the villagers, sensing something without understanding it, began to pray to gods they had long abandoned. But it was not the gods who heard them. It was the Father, the one beneath, and he was walking. No one saw his face. Not truly, only flashes, a silhouette among trees, a shadow across a window, a reflection in a bowl of water. But every time someone looked, they forgot what they'd seen, their minds folding over the shape of him like cloth hides a knife, because he wasn't meant to be remembered, only fed. And the village? It had been fasting for years, living on the scraps of borrowed memory, on borrowed names, on the sacrifice of one man they had forgotten. And now the Harvest Father walked to collect. He didn't need to knock. Doors opened for him. People stepped aside, unsure why they did. Children blinked and found their drawings full of spirals. Women woke from dreams with their mouths full of dirt. Men forgot their own names mid-prayer. And somewhere in the mist, a low voice whispered, "Who wore the mask? Who knelt beneath the ash? Who gave what was owed?" No one could answer. No one even understood the question. But far beyond the silo, in the forest no longer marked on any map, a single tree stood. Smooth bark, no leaves, no sound. Just a spiral carved in its side, old, worn, but still pulsing faintly in the cold. And beneath it, a figure stood watching the village from afar. His shirt torn, his hands stained with soil, his face no longer his own, not entirely. And in his chest, a hollow where a name used to be. Not dead, not alive, just remembered. By the land, by the crows, by the wind that never stopped whispering. He walks, he remembers, he waits. Because the Harvest Father is not a god, he is not a myth, he is not a monster. He is the grief that was never given, the sorrow buried too shallow, the balance unpaid for too long. And every time a village forgets, every time the soil is taken without thanks, every time love is clung to like a shield instead of offered like a prayer, he walks.